Hello, my name is Jerry, and this is going to be part 8 in the AK GT40 build set of videos that I'm doing. This video will detail fitting one piston, which I'll explain in a moment, head and the push rods and rockers, so that I can determine what push rod length I need. Also, to kill two birds with one stone, the actual one piston I'm going to fit, I'll put some plasticine on the top of the piston so that I can see what clearance I've got between valves and pistons at top dead centre. I'll do this in 3, maybe 4 positions of the timing set. When the camshaft and crank are timed together, the sprocket that goes onto the crankshaft can be put in a number of different positions with different keyways on it. This allows you to advance or retard the camshaft. So I'll be trying various different positions to see that I don't have a clearance problem between valves and pistons. So that if at a later date I wish to advance the cam or retard it, then I know that there'll be no problems. So the next task then is to build up the engine with those particular parts. Right, so the first job to do is to install the crank. I've gone ahead now, cleaned up all the surfaces on the block, cleaned up the bearings from where we'd used them before, dropped them back in nice and clean, flush with the block. I should point out that I'd sent off, after I'd done my previous checks, I'd sent off the crank, flywheel, clutch assembly, the harmonic balancer, all off to be separately balanced by Frank Anderson of Anderson Racing. Done a super job. Very, very good they were from stock. You only had to take off a few grams in a couple of places. So that's all come back. So we're now in a position to actually install the parts. So having done that, I'm now going to install the ARP studs. And to do those, what I do is take a stud, make sure you give it a clean with some brake cleaner. It's got 2 different threads, a coarse and a fine. The coarse is the one that goes into the block. So just give it a little bit of lubrication. I just put a little blob of engine lube assembly on there, just to help it go into the block. Where are we? There we are. Rub it around with your fingers and then insert and take it down till it's finger tight. Make sure the actual stud shank does drop below the surface of the block. You'll see each thread is slightly undercut into the block. So that goes down hand tight, and we do that with all the studs. Now all my studs are the same length because I'm using an aftermarket sump and sump pickup. So I don't need the long pickup pipe that comes back into the bowl of the sump. Mine's quite a short one up here, so I don't need the extra stud or the extra length of stud that has the nut to actually locate that particular part on. Right, that's all the studs in. What I then like to do, because ARP have got a hex in the end of each one, which I guess is for removing them if they're stuck in there tight. But once they're in hand tight, what I like to do is just put them in and just take them down until you just feel it bottom out. Right, my particular engine is a very early one, and because of that it has a split seal. So there's 2 halves, there we are, of the seal. And as per the instructions that come with the seal, where are we? You can see it. It says, there we are, caution, some caps have a steel pin in the bottom of the seal groove area. Remove before installing a molded rubber seal. So what I've got on mine, which I'll point out to you. So if you've got the same, there we are, you can see there's a pin there. You can see it sticking up, which I guess is to stop the actual seal rotating for the old-fashioned, what was presumably a rope seal that went in there. And if we turn it over, and if you can make it out, it's just shown there. So hopefully I can knock that through, and then we'll seal that hole up with some silicone when we fit the 2 half seals in. Right, so the best way to remove the pin is with a Dremel with a slitting disc on the end. So that's what we're going to do. I did thoroughly clean the cap and the bearing after the grinding operation. Well, that's removed that. So we can then start to assemble these parts. Right, the first thing to do then is to fit the seal. So as we are at the back end of the engine here, I would personally put it so as I've got it now. So that's the lip. The front of the engine is in that direction. This is the flywheel end. So that's how it's going to go in. When we put it in, I'm going to put some silicone in the groove, slide this in, and then we slightly offset it. Just show you. So I'm going to take the camera. So we slightly offset it up slightly, and then this one will drop down slightly below. And then we do exactly the same on the cap that goes on top. But what I'm going to do is just assemble those two parts so that the silicone doesn't have time to go off, so that we can get those in the right positions. So that one's ready to push down on this side, and then this end, this one will go on. So again, we want to put it with the lip facing towards the front of the engine. So this one will in fact, going to run the right way, will go up into the cap, but will be a gap to take care of the offset because that one's poking up. Then I'll slide this on. Again, we'll silicone it first, silicone it around there. I won't silicone the ends yet. So we'll slide it on, tighten them up so that the two halves are in the right position. So that's what I'll do now. So I've thoroughly cleaned the slot. I've thoroughly cleaned the actual half a gasket. So I'm now going to add some silicone in the slot. This is a general purpose high temperature silicone. So that's going to go nicely all the way around. We have the sealing surface, the lip facing towards the front of the engine. Slot them in, protruding about 3/8 of an inch. That's what they recommend. And we slot him down in. So that down in there quite nicely. Then we do exactly the same on the cap. Right, so I've done that now. I've siliconed it again exactly the same. And we've now got the end sticking up there so that when it goes in, it mates with that half there. So we're now going to just slop the cap over, double check we got it run the right way. We've got a gap, or it will have a gap. And that will push down into there. So load him on. And a couple of nuts on. We're not looking to over tighten this. It's just so that the gasket or the seal sorts itself out. And just remove. Oh, it's come up nice and easy, so that's okay now. Right, so he's pushed him up slightly on that side, and I think we're down on that side slightly. So remove any silicone around from where the two pieces join. So that's ready to go. So then we have to get ready to put the crank in. And again, we need plenty of lube. So put some on your finger. Put it into the bearings, but don't come all the way up to the top. Just come until you're within about 1/4 of an inch. Now drop the crank in. I've given it a thorough clean since I've had it back from Frank Anderson. It's heavy. Right, when it goes in, try not to rotate it so you don't get any assembly lube onto the gaps. Right, so that's ready. So now we need to drop the caps on. A little bit of lube in the middle. Don't go all the way to the top. Just come up half, come up again within about 1/4 of an inch. And on this one, again, we want to put some lube on the bearing, on the seal. Just give it a bit of a start when we run it. So drop him on. No, we don't, because we haven't put a blob of silicone on each of the ends there. So we're going to add just a bit on the ends. Just so when they push together, they do make a seal. So I've done a blob on there now. Slide the cap on. And then repeat that all the way along. That's all the end caps on. So now we have to fit the washers and nuts onto the studs. So to do that, we have to lubricate them up with the ARP lubricant. And to do that, again, this is all very straightforward. Small amount down onto the face. We'll just do one at one end and then repeat all the way through. Take a washer, make sure that's lubricated, drop him on. Ditto with the second washer. And then just run some around the threads. Then take a nut around its bottom surface and push them up into the threads. We'll do the same with the other one. Again, on the mating surface, up into the threads. Take him hand tight. And then repeat that all the way through. Right, that's all the nuts on. So then we just sort of starting the right order, which I can never remember. So I've got it written on a piece of paper. So we start with number 1, just hand tight, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Now just a little bit hand tight, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then we have to centralise the thrust bearings. So for that, take a hammer with a nylon end, give it a clout. That should centralise the bearings. So at this point, make sure you can rotate the crank. It's nice and smooth. No binding anywhere. Feels good to me. So we can now start to torque it down. So the first settings we go to is 25 pounds. We've got to go all the way up to 70, so I'll go 25, 50 and then 70. Torque is set to 25. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'll set it to 50. Now I'm set to 50. One, 10. I'm going to set it to 70. Again, just check we can still rotate the crank. No binding. Now set to 70. This is a bit of a workout now. We'll start with number 1. 2 and 10. Right, that's fully torqued up. Again, just rotate the crank. No tight spots. Right, first of all I'm going to fit piston number 1. I've already fitted, there we go, I've already fitted the rings on. There's plenty of articles on YouTube on fitting rings, so that's straightforward, I'm not going to go into that. I've got a ring compressor on there, a universal one. I've fitted the bearing and I've given it a coat of the assembly lube. I've made sure the crank is nice and clean, no foreign materials on there. So this is where we're going to insert number 1 in. We've got it labelled on the outside number 1. We check we've got piston number 1. And we check the arrow is pointing the correct direction. So that when it's in, the valve cutouts are towards the centre of the engine. And again, number 1 is the furthest one forward. So again, we check that we have a flat surface and we have a tapered surface. And again, I check on my conrod that my arrow is also in that direction. So we offer him up from underneath, and then using a mallet. First of all, we make sure the ring compressor is square on the block surface. And then we gently tap and then we need to rotate the crank so that he's ready to accept the big end. Again, keep double checking. Again, rotate the crank slightly so it's nicely lined up. Keep the ring compressor on the block. And we're in. So again, make sure we're hard up against the crank, which we are. And now we're going to drop the other half. Again, we make sure we've got plenty of lube. Now initially, I'm not going to put any ARP on the bolts. Just want to get the cap on and held in position. So number one goes to number one. And we just want to nip these up just to pull the bearing together. So just hand tight. And we should be able to find that we can now rotate the crankshaft. We have some nice movement on the piston up and down. No binding. Check piston number one. Valve cutouts going towards the valley. And the arrow is pointing forwards. So that's got piston 1 in, and we repeat that now for, I'm going to put in piston 5. So when you come back, I'd have done 1 and 5. Pistons 1 and 5 now fitted. We can now rotate the engine over. And lock him off with the pin. And clean up the head. So the next stage then is to prepare the head. Because the hydraulic pushers in there have got a spring in them, what we don't want them to do is, as they're pushing the valve open, we don't want the hydraulic tappet compressing, we want it to stay solid. So what we do is on the actual valve itself, we remove the springs and put in a very weak spring that just holds the valve against its seat. So that's what we'll be doing on this one. Right, slight change of plan. Going to do it all on piston number 5. Although I've got piston number 1 in as well. So we've turned the engine over. I've plastered plasticine in the valve pocket area on the piston. So that's ready there, although we're not actually connected to the camshaft yet. So I'll just move that down out the way. Right, so that's well clear. So next job now, I've got the head gasket on, is to actually put the head on. Got a couple of studs in there, a couple of studs in. So we put the head on, just nip him. I'll put another 2 in there, as that's the cylinder we're playing with. Certainly not torquing it down. And then we'll start to add the other bits. I've also done a mod to the head. I've removed the heavy duty or the twin springs that it comes with, and I fitted a couple of light ones, very lightweight ones, so that way we don't end up compressing the hydraulic tappets. So we will get proper lift and know what's going on. Right, I've gone ahead and loosely fitted the head. I fitted my 051 head gasket, we can just see in there. I've only put in 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts and just knit them down, or 4 studs with 4 nuts on, just knit them down. And you'll notice that let's get round so you can see in the light. I've removed on these 2 the valve springs. So this particular test, or this particular check, is going to make sure that the push rods are the right length. So I'll just set the camera up and we'll run through what we're going to fit. So first part we're going to fit are going to be the hydraulic tappets. Just give them a little bit of an oil. And just drop them in. Same with the second one. We'll put proper lube on these when we come to do a proper assembly. So they push down. And then, as we haven't got the camshaft connected to the engine, we can rotate the camshaft and we can see they're going up and down as they should do. So if we set it so that the left hand one is just down and then do another sort of quarter turn, they're both fully down. Then we take the push rods, we drop those in through the head so they sit in a little cutout. And then we have these 2 items which stops push rod from wandering around at the top. They're marked left, right, and they've got a number 6103 on them. So they want to go left and right as they're labelled. Just drop them in there for the moment. You can see how they work. Next items to go in are the studs that supports the rocker. Again, very straightforward. Again, we're not going to use any lube or any Loctite at the moment. It's just purely to check the length of the push rods. So just finger tight, nothing more, so that we can move the plates backwards and forwards, as you can see I'm doing there. And this one can also move. So the next job then is to add the rockers themselves. If you look inside, there's a flat surface, and if I spin it round, there's a curved surface. We want to be able to see the flat surface. So obviously how they go on. And again, we do the same with this one. We want to be able to see the flat surface. Drop him on. What we now need to do is to work out where these plates have got to go. So I'll move the camera around so you can see what we're doing. What we're trying to do is to set that so it's dead in line with the top of the valve, not to the left and not to the right. And the same with this one on this side. And that is controlled by there we go, that's controlled by those plates there. If I grab hold of the rocker and rotate, you can see it's actually moving that plate. So once we've got those set up central on the valves, gently lift those off and just nip up the two studs a bit tighter and then double check. When we come to actually build this up and do these properly, they need to be torqued down to 50 pounds-foot, and we'll put some Loctite in there as well. So you certainly don't want those undoing. Right, so that's now in position there. So the next task then is to mark up the tops of the valves. We use a whiteboard marker. So we're just going to colour in the top of the valve. Quick blow to dry it. Make sure you've got a good coating on there. Then insert or drop on the rocker. Then we're going to put on the lock nuts. Make sure that the locking Allen key or locking Allen bolt is just protruding out the top so that we don't get it bottoming out. Screw on. And what we've got to do is we've got to screw this on until everything stops moving up and down. So you'll feel a bit of resistance. What we're looking for is just get a bit of push rod movement up and down, and just till it stops moving. And do the same on this one. And then remember there, we're going to do about a quarter turn on there. So a quarter turn. Quarter turn. We're not looking to lock them at the moment, as we're only checking for push rod length. Now we rotate the engine, and you'll start to see this one starting to lift, which is operating the push rod. But because my spring on my valve is still quite strong, you'll notice down here that as we're going up, now we're okay in this case. What we need to do is to make sure that the push rod isn't sunk into the tappet. It was a little bit, so we'll come back to that in a moment. So we're now going to lift this one. When we get to the very top, which is about there, we need to make sure that we don't have any compression in the hydraulic tappet. So rotate the rocker and keep pushing down on the valve until you can just rotate the push rod. You should see it come to its top travel there. And that's as far as it's going to go. So come round and we'll repeat that with this one over here. So we go to the top, and again push push, push. And just about rotate the push rod now. Do that once more around. So bring them back down until they're both off. So now we're going to take these off again and we're going to check what wear marks we've got on the top of the valves. Now if the push rod is the right length, then we hopefully will have a nice silver patch showing right down the centre of the face of the valve. I'll just bring the camera in so we can see what we've got. This camera's not working very well, is it? Right, so now we go up. Right, so I'm pretty sure I've got more or less a straight line running down the middle, or the marks down the middle of the top of the valve, and ditto on that one as well. So I don't think I can get much better than that. So I'm happy with the push rod length I've got. I'm also going to assume, rightly or wrongly, that all the others are going to be exactly the same. Certainly don't want to mix and match push rod lengths. So that's where we are at that stage. What I now have to do next is to put the original valve springs back on to there. Double check the position of these plates. Do this for each location and do it for the other head as well. And then when I've got those in the right positions, I'll show you how we fit Loctite and torque these up to the right mount. Right, next job is to see if we've got any interference between the piston and the valve train. So again, as we need to get full valve lift, we'll leave the small easy springs in there. We'll have to give it a bit of a help when we turn the engine over. So what we have to do now is to line up the sprocket that goes on the crankshaft and the drive chain that goes up to the camshaft. So that's the next part we'll do. But before we do that, we must make sure we take the rockers off, because what we don't want to do is to get it in a wrong position where the valves are actually hitting the piston because I've got it 1, 2 teeth out wrong. So that's what we're going to do now. Right, this is the sprocket that actually goes on the engine, and we've got 0 for the keyway, so that's 0 degrees, and then retard 2, 4, 6, 8 degrees, advance 2, 4, 6, 8 degrees. But before we can put this on, we've got to slide off the one off the camshaft, put the chain round and push them on together. And the important thing to remember is that the dot there should line up with the keyway there. So make sure that the sprocket will go on first of all. Now I'm going to go advance 4, put the chain, we've got advance 4 with the chain on, rotate the engine a couple of times, then take it off. Then I'm going to go to retarded 4, which is there. Again, rotate the engine a couple of times, and then I'm going to go to 0. And again, rotate the engine a couple of times. I'll then take it all apart and we'll see what witness marks we have on the plasticine. Right, find the right size socket, which is a 5/8. It needs to be a multi one to match the bolt. And then obviously we've got no rocker arms in at the moment, so we know we're not going to hit anything. Just need to make sure that we can turn the engine over. And as we turn it over, we should see the camshaft opening and closing. Pushing the push rods up and down, which is brilliant. So we'll bring him round. We want top dead centre. So if we come round, I've now got the exhaust opening, exhaust closing, inlet opening. So at that point, I want to go around one more full turn to make sure that the valves are closed. Which is in that position there. I'll now add the rocker arms. Right, push rods are in. I've nipped those up as we know. Rockers in. Remembering flat surface facing up. Again, as before, just so that there's hardly any movement, in fact, no movement now. No movement. Quarter of a turn. Right, now we can rotate the engine. And we need to make sure that when we're on full lift on both of those valves, that we help it to make sure that the tappet hasn't compressed. So as we rotate, you see this valve now, the exhaust is opening. That's its maximum lift. I'm going to help it now to make sure that this isn't compressed. So I'm pushing down with the valve and I can now rotate the rocker. So carry on round. Exhaust is now closing. Bit of overlap. And you can see now the inlet is opening. And we take that to maximum. And again, we help it a little bit until we can rotate easily the push rod. And we come down and go that once more and lines up the dot. So now we can take it all apart and see what witness marks we have on the top of the piston. So the first thing to do is to remove the rockers. Remove the rockers, remove the push rods. Take the chain off. Put that to one side. Now we can take the head off and lift off the head. And then we have the moment of truth. I'll bring the camera in so you can see. Just I'll try and point it out because it's not obvious. We have, where are we? You can just see a slight indentation going around there and a slight one going around there. Right, what I've done is, rather than the depth gauge, I've just taken a cross-sectional view through it. And you can see the valve indentation in the plasticine. and you can see how much clearance we've got. Yeah, no problems there whatsoever. That's on the inlet, and if we come around to the exhaust side, where are we on the exhaust side? Again, you can see, there we go, indentation, and again, plenty of clearance. So I'm quite happy that I can advance the cam if I need to at a later date.